Are you completely exhausted from seeing your bills piling up every month? Do you feel like no matter what you do, your financial situation never actually improves? Are you noticing that your purchasing power can't afford the same it used to just a few years back? The average American is being hit from all sides, and today we've decided to compile several facts and stats to prove you're not alone in this. But before moving on, we kindly ask you to support our work with a thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss our upcoming lists. Without further ado, here are 20 facts that prove everyday Americans are freaking out about the state of the U.S. economy. 1. Money woes are stressing out most of us. Money trouble is keeping a growing number of Americans up all night. There's been a lot of uncertainty in recent years about the U.S. economy, with inflation, rising interest rates, and the threat of a deep recession. In a new survey by Bankrate, Americans rate financial concerns above health, above current events, above relationships, and work when it comes to the impact on their mental health. Compared to 42% just a year ago, now 52% of respondents say money has a negative impact on their well-being, causing stress, anxiety, worrisome thoughts, loss of sleep, and depression. 2. Nearly a quarter of U.S. adults sometimes don't get enough to eat. Almost 25% of American adults are food insecure, and that's a jump of about 5 percentage points from a year earlier, as food inflation continues to squeeze household budgets, according to CBS News. Food insecurity indicates that someone isn't able to secure enough food for a nutritious diet, which can lead to skipping meals or cutting back on food. Those compromises, though, can have serious implications for a person's health and well-being, health specialists say. The rise in food insecurity comes as more households are struggling to pay their grocery bills, given that costs have surged by over 20% since 2022. 3. Almost 50% of U.S. adults feel they can't afford their former lifestyle. The pandemic and the following economic downturn have lowered the living standards of millions of U.S. workers, and according to a study published by Newswire, nearly half of Americans, or 45%, say they can't afford their previous lifestyle. 8 out of 10, or 83% of respondents, expect the cost of living will become somewhat more or much more expensive in the coming year. Meanwhile, 65% of Americans agree with the statement, "My income has not increased as fast as the cost of food, beverages, and personal care products." 4. Expensive auto loans are financially squeezing American drivers. With inflation pushing car prices to astronomical levels and high interest rates worsening borrowing conditions, the average car payment is hovering around $700 a month right now. For some people, a car payment is now rivaling a rent payment. And with the cost of everything else also going up, U.S. workers are facing the cumulative effect, and many have started to default on their car loans. By now, millions of Americans are also underwater on their car loans, meaning the value of their vehicles is lower than the amount they still owe to the lenders. 5. For many, car maintenance has become a luxury. A survey conducted by Financial Buzz suggests not only that 58% of U.S. vehicle owners could not afford an unexpected repair bill of more than $1,000, but a large portion of the population is also putting off important maintenance. Moreover, 30% of those could not even afford an emergency job that cost more than $500. And 69% could not afford a surprise repair bill of $2,000 or more. The same rate of respondents said that they delay getting maintenance done on their vehicles because of the cost, which can put them and others on the road at serious risk. 6. 68% couldn't support their current living standard for a month if they lost their jobs tomorrow. Bankrate reports that more than 2/3 of Americans say they're worried they wouldn't be able to cover their living expenses for just 1 month if they suddenly lost their primary source of income. In other words, many people out there are hanging by a thread financially. Several workers are just one missed paycheck away from falling into poverty. 7. Americans are using their credit cards to cover basic expenses. New research by Bankrate has found that more people are using their credit cards to finance everyday necessities. Credit card debt has been rising at the fastest pace of any other consumer debt, with 46% of cardholders carrying debt month to month in 2023. 1 year ago, only 39% carried debt month to month. Data has also shown that 30% of Americans have between $1,001 and $5,000 in credit card debt. 15% have $5,001 or more in credit card debt, and about 6% have more than $10,000 in credit card debt. And even though 6% may seem like a small share, that represents over 14 million people. 8. At the same time, the number of people missing credit card payments is already soaring. A separate survey conducted by the same company reveals that most Americans have missed at least one credit card payment this year. Nearly 57% of cardholders are currently delinquent on their debt. One of the most cited reasons for missing a payment was paying for food and groceries, as mentioned by 32% of the respondents. 9. Household debt just reached new record highs. At a time when economic conditions are becoming more unstable, household debt balances set a fresh record high of $17.05 trillion during the first quarter, rising by $148 billion or 0.9% from the fourth quarter of last year, the Federal Reserve Bank of New York reported. That debt load has grown by $2.9 trillion since the end of 2019. In the first 3 months of 2023, the increases in debt were seen across all categories as the cost of living in America has continued to rise faster than people's incomes. 10. More consumers are using buy now, pay later services to pay for food and gas. Buy now, pay later installment plans have become popular among consumers seeking to spread out the cost of big-ticket purchases. But now that rising prices are adding pressure on average American families, more and more people are using these alternative payment methods to be able to afford food and gas, a CNBC report revealed. That is raising alarm bells for economists and consumer advocates who say the surge in the use of these services, coupled with a lack of transparency and little regulatory oversight, leaves them wondering just how much debt Americans are actually getting into. From Affirm and Apple to PayPal and Zip, BNPL transactions are currently estimated to be at least $100 billion annually, a figure that analysts say could shoot up to between $1 trillion to $4 trillion within a few years. 11. Mortgage debt is skyrocketing, with homeowners carrying $10,000 more on their balance than they did last year. Mortgage balances shown on consumer credit reports rose by $121 billion during the first quarter of 2023 and stood at $12.04 trillion at the end of March. New mortgages increased the average mortgage balance to $236,443 in the past year. That is a 7.3% rise from 1 year prior. That has marked the third consecutive year where the average mortgage balance increased by more than $10,000. The increase of 7.3%, or $16,063, exceeded the previous increase of 5.9%. 12. Rising mortgage rates are making more and more Americans just give up on home ownership. Mortgage rates moved higher again last week, pushing more buyers back to the sidelines and making more people just give up on purchasing a home right now. Every 0.25% increase in mortgage rates pushes over 1.8 million Americans out of the market, and that's data from the Mortgage Bankers Association. Mortgage applications actually dropped by 7.3% last week compared to the previous week, and volume is now 45% more than a year ago and is now sitting at a 28-year low. 13. Foreclosure rates are spiking again. Americans are losing their homes at a faster rate in 2023 as banks make up for the lost time after state and federal foreclosure bans expired. Lenders repossessed nearly 96,000 properties during the first 3 months of 2023. That's an increase of 22% from the same period last year, according to real estate data provider Atom. A home is considered to be in foreclosure after a mortgage payment is between 30 and 90 days late, depending on the state. Filings have increased 23 straight months on an annual basis, with Michigan reporting the highest rate of foreclosures from any state in the previous quarter at 41%. 14. The average renter is cost-burdened. Today, the average American renter is now paying more than 30% of their income on housing. Rent hikes soar past wages, and affordable housing remains scarce, according to a recent report from Moody's Analytics. There's a term in housing policy circles for renters in that situation. It's called cost-burdened. This marks the first time that's occurred in more than 20 years that the ratings agency has been tracking the metric. When Moody's started tracking housing affordability in the 2000s, the average household spent about 23% of its income on rent. A decade ago, it was 26% of its income on rent. At the end of last year is when that average hit 30%. We are in a situation where this cost of shelter, a necessity to life, has continued to rise, and it is hurting households, said Thomas LaSalvia, Director of Economic Research at Moody's Analytics. In some places, that rate is even higher. For example, the average in New York City is more than 68% of income, and in Miami is about 42%. 15. Meanwhile, homelessness is rising all over the country. The number of people experiencing homelessness in America has grown by 32% since 2018. About 30% of them are considered to be chronically homeless, which means they've been without homes for more than 12 months or have experienced extended periods of extended homelessness over the past 3 years. In May 2022, roughly 603,100 people spent the night unsheltered on a given night in the U.S. That number rose by 100,000 by May 2023. Although most states saw their homeless populations rise in the past 5 years, in Delaware, Vermont, Louisiana, and Maine, the tally more than doubled over the past 12 months. 16. No matter where you live in America, you can't afford the cost of living on minimum wage. The minimum wage is meant to be a living wage, but it falls short by a lot. The federal minimum wage for non-exempt employees in the United States is $7.25, but that hourly rate hasn't kept up with the cost of living since the late 1960s. In fact, the earnings of a minimum wage worker with a family of 4 fall well below the poverty line. While many states and some cities have minimum wage rates much higher than $7.25 and continue to revise them, all minimum wage earners still struggle to pay bills, secure housing, and support their families. In 2023, full-time employees earning the federal minimum make just $15,080 a year. That is if they work 40 hours each of the 52 weeks in a year without a vacation. 17. Workers are saving an increasingly smaller share of their salaries every month. Data from the U.S. Bureau of Economic Analysis exposed that the U.S. personal savings rate is now 88% lower than in 2020 and 61% below pre-pandemic savings rates. In April 2020, the personal savings rate spiked to 33.8%, an absolute record. But as lockdowns were lifted and scorching hot inflation started to hit every good and service we consume, that trend started to reverse. The seasonally adjusted annual rate of personal saving was 4.1% in May. Now, that's well below the average annual rate of more than 8%, and that goes back to 1959. But that is better than the 2.7% savings rate seen in June 2022 when it dipped to a 15-year low. However, many low-income families are barely able to save that, with an increasing percentage of U.S. workers currently living paycheck to paycheck. 18. More than 40% of Americans have already exhausted their savings. At this point, many Americans have already exhausted their savings and are now deep in the hole trying to keep up with the rising cost of living. The U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics reports that 49% of Americans have less savings than a year ago. Of those, 43% have no savings at all. 68% of the surveyed said they are saving less due to inflation, up from 49% last year. And about the same rate say income or employment status change is causing them to save less for unexpected expenses. That puts these workers at serious risk of experiencing financial insecurity. One single emergency expense could force them to take on high levels of debt and impact their ability to make ends meet. 19. 53 million people received help from food banks in the past couple of years. A recent Feeding America Food Bank survey exposed that 1 in 6 adults relied on charitable food, such as free groceries or meals, last year. Since 2021, more than 53 million people turned to food banks and food pantries to have enough to feed themselves and their families. That's about 33% more than the number of people who sought help during the pandemic. The organization also reported that 80% of food banks are still seeing either an increase or steady demand for emergency food services. And 20, Americans remain discouraged about personal finances. Americans are quite frustrated about their personal finances, with the majority, 55%, saying their financial situation is only fair or poor, rather than excellent or good. More also report that their financial situation is worsening, 50%, than improving, 37%, according to a Gallup poll released in May. Their financial assessments are nearing a 2-decade low, with middle-income earners expressing the lowest levels of financial confidence, researchers noted. Considering all the economic challenges our population faces on a daily basis, is totally comprehensible why so many of us are losing hope that things will actually improve at some point. Unfortunately, with a recession threatening to slow down economic activity and force businesses to conduct mass layoffs, conditions are likely to get much harder for Americans in 2023 and beyond. This suffering is shared by many, and by the end of this crisis, it's safe to say our lives will never be the same. Thank you for watching.